The world's largest nuclear accident happened at Chernobyl, this huge explosion and meltdown of a nuclear power plant. It's an accident where there was that vitally dangerous mixture of fatigue and incompetence. A group of technicians were doing some tests and they kept on getting delayed. They started early in the morning, it got later in the afternoon, later in the evening, and then finally, as it came past midnight, they took the shortcut of switching off the safety systems. And so it's that mixture between fatigued people making a poor judgment and trying to push something through that causes so many of these accidents.
People who are in the service industries where the machines don't stop and the expectation is that you're supposed to function on your task as well in the middle of the night as during the day. We know that doesn't happen. People do feel drowsy, people do drop off.
La naturaleza de las cosas, con David Suzuki. La necesidad de dormir. El diario matutino solía marcar el comienzo del día. Ya no. Ahora la vida se rige por el correr del reloj. En nuestra sociedad de 24 horas y 7 días a la semana, una de las principales víctimas ha sido el sueño. Para muchas personas, mantenerse despiertas será uno de sus grandes retos del día siguiente.
When we talk about sleep, we can't separate it off from the other major component of our existence, and that's waking. So we need to think of it in terms of the cycling that we all go through from the moment we're born to the moment we die. There is this rhythm of sleeping and waking that's core to our existence. We cannot survive without it.
Ni siquiera en el espacio es fácil concebir el sueño.
The space program has been very important to us. We've had an opportunity to work with NASA and the Russian Space Agency on the phase 1 of the International Space Station. These were the studies on Mir. And why the space program is interested in that is because sleep gets screwed up in space. The notion of sleeping in space is so different from our experience. When we go to sleep, we always think of lying down. You lie down on a pillow, you lie down on a bed, you lie down on the couch, you lie down on something. There's no place to lie down because it doesn't matter. There's no up, there is no down. And so you can just float out there.
A una gran distancia de los astronautas, en Estados Unidos, se estima que 70 millones de personas sufren de trastornos en el sueño.
Overall, 24% of Canadians complain of difficulties falling asleep or staying asleep. A little bit more, about 27-28% of Canadians never feel refreshed or not often refreshed. Okay. About 5% of Canadians have trouble keeping awake during the day. And about the same proportion of people sleep less than 6 hours.
About 5-6 hours sleep a night, around there.
By Friday, I'm pretty tired. When it's like 4-5 hours sleep.
3 to 4 hours would be average for me for many years. I've kind of improved that in the last couple years up to maybe 6 hours.
I can get the same amount of sleep on some days and feel very tired, and on other days get 6-7 hours of sleep and feel fine.
You just feel there's not enough hours to sleep. Human body only needs 4 hours of good sleep,
The 3 Mile Island disaster, Chernobyl, the Exxon Valdez, all of them were tied to human error as one of the key components. And when you look at it, it's tied to their occurrence at times when people are not able to make the right decision, usually at nighttime, or people who are making the decisions have been up for long periods of time. For example, the space shuttle disaster.
2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Roll program. Roger, roll, Challenger.
Engines throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up. Challenger, go at throttle up.
The key engineers had been up with very little sleep, maybe only 2 or 3 hours sleep for several nights in a row. They'd been up since 2 o'clock in the morning. And here we had a mixture of very fatigued people making that unfortunate decision in retrospect they should not have made.
From the beginning of time, it was traditional that when the sun went down, we would go to bed. And we would sleep until the sun rose in the morning, and we would go about our work.
Ahora, de noche, no solo trabajamos, sino que también jugamos. Las oportunidades son infinitas. Veamos, por ejemplo, nuestros asuntos financieros, hacer amistades, jugar con máquinas de videos, casi todo lo que podamos imaginarnos. Y muchos de estos lugares nunca cierran, están tentándonos las 24 horas del día. Existe una creencia cada vez mayor de que el dormir es un desperdicio de tiempo. Y no resulta sorprendente que las cafeterías disfruten de una bonanza al vender unas muy bien cotizadas bebidas con cafeína para mantenernos activos.
We've got Edison to thank for the 24-hour society when we really get down to it. About 100 years ago, in about the 1880 or so, the invention of the light bulb and electric power and electric motors and so forth, all the products of that very fertile mind, ended up with us being able to now start running factories and plants and businesses 24 hours a day.
En los oscuros años 30, Charlie Chaplin mostró una imagen del futuro cuando presentó el frenético mundo de la línea de ensamblaje en una película que proféticamente llamó Tiempos Modernos.
These days it's gone much further than that. If you want to serve a population that's global, you need to have your service centers open 24 hours a day. And it's the advent of modern telecommunications and computers and satellite links and the internet, all based upon that original invention of Edison, that has led us today to this non-stop, continuously operating world. A world that really isn't suited for the human race.
Es un ambiente de trabajo demente, oscuro afuera y muy iluminado adentro. Aquí se exige que las personas funcionen a la medianoche como si fuera mediodía, aun cuando nuestras propias experiencias revelan que ello no es posible. Como consecuencia, disminuye la productividad y aumentan los accidentes.
The problem is, we as a human race need to learn to cope with our invention. We need to deal with the mismatch between our physiology and the 24-hour world we've created.
El mundo de las 24 horas se extiende hasta el espacio y puede convertirse en una experiencia desorientadora. En la nave, la vida de los astronautas se rige por el tiempo transcurrido, es decir, el número de horas a partir del lanzamiento, las cuales no tienen ninguna relación con la hora de la Tierra. Existe gravedad nula y mucha presión como para que cuente cada segundo. La misión de neurología de la NASA en 1998 puso como prioridad el estudio de los trastornos del sueño en el espacio. El astronauta canadiense Dave Williams era uno de los tripulantes. De vuelta en la Tierra, Williams se encargó del Directorio de Ciencia y Vida Espacial en la sede de la NASA en Houston, donde estas réplicas de lanzadores se usan como módulos de entrenamiento.
You've got to be sleeping well, especially when you're out in space, because if you're not sleeping well and you're not well rested, your performance will decrease. What we try and do is schedule 8 hours a night for people to sleep. Now, if you go to bed right away, you don't necessarily fall asleep. You might be lying there thinking about something that you have to do the next day. So even though we've allocated 8 hours, it seems crew members will sleep less than that. Depending upon the study and the mission, some people sleep between 6.5, 7 hours a night. So it seems that they may take a half an hour, 45 minutes or so fall asleep.
Is that enough time, most of the time, to be refreshed?
Yeah, I think that there's, most people would tell you that that's similar to what they would sleep on the ground. And that on the ground that would allow them to feel refreshed. But when we study sleep in space, there are a number of unique aspects of space that affect your ability to sleep. What is it like sleeping in the absence of gravity? What about noise levels? And you mentioned the cramped quarters. And in fact, the quarters seem small on the ground, but when you get out into space, they're actually a lot bigger because you can use all the available area. You can float up and hang out on the ceiling. You know, you and I could have lunch upside down on the ceiling and it would be not a problem at all. What we can do is we'll sort of climb up here and just show you inside. Those are the sleep restraint systems that we've got. You can imagine yourself sliding into there, and that would hold you in one place. But the amazing thing is that you'll be in there all strapped in, and then with time, your arms are going to creep out and be floating in front of you freely like that, because in space, the natural position of the upper body is to just be floating out. So you'll have astronauts who will tell you, there I was dreaming in space, and I dreamt that there were these arms floating around. They wake up and they see these hands, and they go, oh, they're my own hands, you know? It's amazing. But we also have the sleep stations, which is about the same size as a sleep restraint system, but it looks like a closet. There's a door on it. You slide right into it, close the door. Because it is dark and it's relatively soundproof, it's easy to fall asleep once you get in there. Of course, if you were sleeping up on the flight deck, every 90 minutes you have a day-night transition. And even though we put screens up and blinds on the flight deck, it's still probably lighter up there than it would be if you're sleeping down on the middeck in one of the sleep stations.
Normally on Earth, we're affected by day and night, but up in space, of course, day and night is a lot quicker. Do you think that affects the natural rhythm of sleep that we have?
Well, that's an excellent question, because it's that light-dark cycle that cues our internal biological clock. In space, every 45 minutes really, it changes as you're going through day-night, orbiting the Earth every 90 minutes. But I think what ends up happening is your body cues to the light inside the orbiter itself. If it's light in the orbiter, you're thinking, okay, this is my daytime, and then when we have to go to sleep, we turn all the lights down and things, so it becomes quite dark and you're able to go to sleep.
I love the story of German Titov. In 1961, he went up after Yuri Gagarin, and he was there just about a day. Now, the funny thing about this man is he's the first person to oversleep in space. He actually slept 30 minutes longer than his schedule. He had to wake him up to get him back to working.
El Dr. Charles Czeisler es un importante estudioso del sueño y asesor de la NASA.
Astronaut crew members typically lose 1 to 3 hours of sleep every day when they're in the space environment. No one knows precisely why it is that it's difficult for crew members to sleep in space as compared to sleeping on the ground. But it is known that if you lose that much sleep each day, that builds up a cumulative sleep deprivation that has an adverse effect on performance. In fact, within 4 or 5 days, the adverse effect on performance is equivalent to that which would occur if you missed an entire night of sleep. And so we've been working, first of all, to try to characterize the nature of sleep in space and compare it with sleep on the ground.
Tanto en el espacio como en la Tierra, se recomienda dormir un mínimo de 8 o 10 horas, si es posible. Pero actualmente, ¿quién duerme tanto tiempo?
right now I'm working on about 5.5 hours sleep. I don't sleep very well on a midnight shift. It's very active out here. As long as it's active, you're awake and things are happening around you. The worst time of night is when everything just kind of dies and you're driving around. There's nobody on the road.
I get off work at 7 a.m. usually, and I would stay up, feed the kids their breakfast, get them to school, do a couple of loads of laundry, go to bed about 10 o'clock in the morning, and then I would be up at 3 in the afternoon to pick them up from school. That would be complicated further with perhaps a court appearance at, say, 9 or 10 o'clock. You may sit in court all day. I would continue from the pickup from school, the dinner routine, the bed routine, and then show up at work and put in an 8-hour shift in the car. It's difficult. I don't sleep 8 hours. I sleep about 4 or 5. My husband and I are both sleep deprived, and it's a never-ending cycle until retirement.
You drive around in this city or you drive around in the suburbs and you look up into the hotel rooms or the homes and everything else, and people are sleeping. And you're driving around and you're not sleeping. You like to be normal, whatever normal could be.
I've been working in news for almost 10 years now. It does put a bit of a strain on the family, to be able to do this and sort of have a normal family life.
The transition from sleeping during the day to sleeping at night, it's really difficult for my body to adjust.
If you're yanked off of it and then stuck on another shift, it's like having jet lag.
It's a constant struggle just to stay awake. You just want to stay awake.
You can get really tired at around 3 or 4 in the morning. Your body just starts to shut down, and it's hard to concentrate.
I take sleeping pills now and then.
Mother Teresa's out. I'll sleep 4 hours, I'll get up for a few hours, and then I'll go back to sleep again. Get up and it's time to go to work, and that causes all kinds of other problems. You don't go out, you don't socialize, you don't exercise.
I'm happy doing what I'm doing, but I definitely can't see myself doing this kind of shift work for another beyond 5 years.
El trabajo por turnos resulta difícil para cualquiera, pero en el caso de los bomberos puede ser peligroso.
Right now we just finished our 3 and 3, which includes 3 days, and then switches over to 3 nights. I call it the killer shift because your body just gets used to being on days, and then you're switching over to being on nights. By the time you're done all that, your body's just messed up and doesn't know which way to go.
Sometimes you come in and you're hoping it's not going to be very busy tonight because physically that you're not probably as strong or as well rested that you would like to be. When you're there, you're more than 100% awake all the time at a fire. You get there and it's the sound, it's the lights, it's the sirens, it's people running all over the place, it's the heat, everything that brings you as a crew, as firefighters together and working as a team.
We had a baby in the hospital, so I was going home from here in the morning to the suburbs, driving the hospital, coming back and coming in. And I shouldn't have been doing it, but on the way into work on a night shift, I fell asleep and I went across 3 lanes of the 401, which kind of scared me a lot. But that was the worst I've ever had.
An OPP officer was killed yesterday morning when his cruiser was hit by a truck along the Queen Elizabeth Way. The driver of the truck was not hurt. One sergeant says the driver told officers he'd fallen asleep at the wheel.
People often report falling asleep at the wheel of the car. Sometimes they're not even aware that they fall asleep. All they know is they're on automatic, and they suddenly become aware of having traversed a distance, and they don't know how they got there. Or they might find their car veering from the lane of traffic. If you're on a highway, you hit the soft shoulder. You say, my God, I must have dozed off for a moment.
Driving your car on a freeway, particularly a monotonous freeway, and particularly when you're sleep deprived, and particularly when you do it at night, that's the cause of, in fact, over half the fatal accidents on the highway. driver drowsiness accidents actually account for perhaps only 10% of total accidents on freeways, but they account for 50% of the fatal ones.
Now, what we'd like to do is to get some measure of your driving ability, and this driving simulator has been designed to do that. When the simulation starts, you'll see the hood of the car.
El dormir menos afecta las destrezas del conductor de muchas maneras. Entorpece su coordinación, alarga su tiempo de reacción y genera pérdida de juicio, lo que pone en peligro su vida.
We found that there's an equivalence between the effects of alcohol on driving and the effects of sleepiness on driving. By the time people have been up for about 24 hours, their ability to drive is roughly equivalent to somebody who is at 80 milligrams % of blood alcohol. That is the legal limit in many jurisdictions. Now, when you're intoxicated, you know you're intoxicated. When you're sleepy, you frequently don't know you're sleepy. So the sleepy driver is in some senses perhaps even more at risk than the intoxicated driver, simply because they can't assess their own degree of sleepiness.
En un estudio realizado entre camioneros de larga distancia, los conductores coincidieron en que se sentían menos agotados de lo que indicaba el sistema computarizado que los controlaba, aunque quizá ayudaba en el camino.
The Magellan monitor that I'm wearing is a device that's like a large wristwatch, sits on the back of the hand, and every so often delivers a vibration that I can feel on my wrist. And I can indicate whether I felt the vibration simply by twitching my finger slightly. A computer inside the device detects that, and then if I fail to respond to a number of stimuli, can set off an audible alarm which can wake me up. And devices like this can feed the driver information about how sleepy they are. The focus that we've recently seen on sleepiness and its effects on performance and how people feel will lead to an improved ability to detect sleepiness, both in the clinic and on the road and on the job.
I'll drive about 15 hours into Detroit, and then by the time I fuel and clear customs and get into Montreal, it'll be in the high 20s hours, probably 30 hours, somewhere around in there. I'm not a dangerous person. I know what I'm capable of doing. I'm in top physical condition. It's hard to believe a man can stay awake and still be alert.
I think we've all had the experience of driving a car, maybe it's late at night, and your head starts to feel drowsy, your eyelids droop, you find yourself drifting off the side of the road, and it's such a common experience, and yet such a dangerous experience.
Yeah, I'm doing all right. I feel good. Probably won't stop now until I get into Toledo.
The reason why those accidents are much more fatal than other types of accidents is because when you fall asleep behind the wheel, you don't have any chance to do an evasive maneuver. You don't brake or swerve, and hence you hit the tree at full pace.
This is just a bunch of trashy papers that they call a logbook, okay? Well, everybody knows that I left Oklahoma Monday. There's no way that I can be in Montreal Wednesday on time, so what am I going to do? I'm going to throw this out the window. I'm going to get me another one. I'm going to rewrite all this out. I'm going to back it up one day, and I'm going to leave Sunday. Falsification of a logbook, what is that? That's lying.
One of the untold stories is the effect of chronic fatigue and sleep deprivation and the lifestyle of working shifts around the clock and the lifespan. In fact, you realize that the average trucker lives for a lifespan of 61 years. The average locomotive engineer may live 64. All these sort of statistics are pointing to the realities that the lifespan we expect of 75 years or more is not one that you can expect if you don't adapt your health and your sleeping patterns to this working of irregular hours. And it's quite a shock when people start to wake up and realize what the consequence is. The average Teamster only gets 18 monthly pension checks after retirement.
Las circunstancias bajo las cuales se estudiaron a los astronautas han llevado a la creación de nuevas tecnologías para investigar los trastornos del sueño.
Now, we also had quite an extensive collection of hardware. This is a device called the digital signal recorder, and essentially this is the equivalent of a full formal sleep laboratory in a hospital, all in a small little box. The amazing thing about this technology, which was developed for the space program, is you can now study people with sleep disorders at home instead of admitting them to the hospital. And as you know, there's over 70 million people with sleep disorders in North America, so this is a fairly common problem that we're facing. But to collect the data, we actually had to wear what's called a sleep net. And this is a series of electrodes that records the brain waves during the different phases of sleep. And there's a number of different phases of sleep that are related to changes in the electrical activity of the brain. And to record that, we had this special sleep net that we would put on. And we can show you how this fits on a simulated mock-up here. And each one of these white areas is where we would have an electrode, and of course we'd fit this down over the ears. We've got this perfectly positioned, but we can record all the changes in the electrical activity of the brain during sleep wearing this device.
And what does it tell you?
Well, this tells us how the patterns of sleep change, and we have what's called rapid eye movement sleep. That's the phase of sleep that's associated with dreaming. Then there's slow wave sleep. That's the phase of sleep that people think of as being associated with that restful component of sleep. And we can look at those patterns and see how they changed in the absence of gravity. Now, the electrode that I pulled out, we might put that right by the eye to look for positions and changes in position of the eye when you're sleeping. We would also have a flow sensor located on your upper lip to let the respiratory physiologist know which phase of inspiration and expiration you're in, how your respiratory patterns change when you're out in space. We also had a microphone that monitored whether or not you were snoring in space, which is an interesting concept because typically we associate snoring with gravity pulling your tongue back into the back of your throat. And the question is, well, what happens in the absence of gravity? And it turns out, lo and behold, you do snore.
You do?
Yes, yeah. Now, to monitor body temperature, we had this very small little pill, and I'm taking a magnet off it right now. The magnet actually deactivates the pill, so when we remove the magnet, the pill is now active. And of course, there's this little warning attached saying remove magnet before swallowing. But this is the pill itself, and inside this thing is an AM frequency radio transmitter hooked up to a little temperature device that monitors your core body temperature. So I could swallow this pill, and it'll float through my digestive tract, sending out signals of what my body temperature is doing throughout the 24-hour day-night cycle.
Los datos compilados por la NASA tienen diversas aplicaciones potenciales.
So we must learn a lot of stuff in space that's relevant to us here on Earth.
Well, in fact, we do, and one of the exciting things about the sleep experiment is understanding how our internal biological clock adapts and changes to these unique shifts that we have with all the light-dark cycles we have in space. That, of course, is relevant to shift workers on Earth who are constantly changing their daily schedule and waking up to work throughout the night. And we understand the role that light plays and as one of these time givers in helping shift our internal biological clock. Not only does that help shift workers, but it also helps people who are traveling across multiple time zones, forcing themselves to adapt to a different time zone very quickly.
The most powerful influence on the rhythms of the body is the influence of light and darkness. And light coming through the eye sends a signal system through to the brain, to the pineal gland, and suppresses melatonin secretion, which is a hormone of darkness. And it's thought that that is a very important component of regularizing the rhythms of the body. I don't think it's just melatonin. There's all kinds of other things. But light, we know, is an important time giver to changing the rhythms of the body, so that if you deliver a certain component of light at a particular time, for example, if you give bright light late in the evening, you can begin to shift the biological clock so that the person goes to bed later.
We're all set, huh?
Este principio permite a la NASA ajustar el reloj biológico de los astronautas para que los periodos de alerta máxima coincidan con los de mayor actividad.
Where we need to phase shift for is looking at the time of launch and the time of landing. and protecting to make sure that the times that the crew have to dock to a space station or deploy a satellite, they're wide awake and that this is occurring during a phase that their internal biological clock is adapted to. So to be able to do that, to meet those operational needs, often we'll have to time shift the crew in the quarantine period before they actually launch to go out into space. To do that, we use what's called phototherapy, or really bright lights, to keep people awake at nighttime, to shift them, to make them think that their night is now daytime. And then during the daytime, they will actually sleep in a very dark, restricted environment to simulate night.
El cambio de tiempo es otra técnica creada por la NASA que pudiera ser aplicada aquí, en la Tierra. Por ejemplo, los controladores aéreos nocturnos deben estar alerta para atender la extraordinaria demanda de su trabajo. También de esto se podrían beneficiar los tripulantes de las aerolíneas.
Remember the event where a airliner going across the U.S. In fact kept on going past Los Angeles, 100 miles out of the ocean. And it did so because the whole crew had fallen asleep. And in fact, it took some fighters and some special chimes in the cockpit to finally wake them up and get them to turn the plane around and come back to land. So delayed planes are not always due to air traffic control and weather. Occasionally, a sleeping pilot can be at fault. My experience of drowsiness, big time, was actually on my first job, which is in Toronto. I graduated out of medical school in England, and I came over and I did a surgical internship. And I found to my horror I was going to be on 36-hour-long shifts, non-stop on duty for 36 hours, doing open heart surgery and other types of surgery procedures, obviously assisting as a young hospital doctor, nodding off in the operating room as we operated, writing prescriptions the next day that I couldn't make any sense of at all. That practice, unfortunately, still goes on today.
And so if you start at 8 o'clock in the morning and you're not getting off until at least noon the following day, that means you're putting in 28 consecutive hours. And if you're really busy, you don't even have a break.
People, I think, have been traditionally have been going through this for, since the beginning of medicine, I guess you could say, hospitalized medicine. And they've learned to cope with it in their various ways.
The fatigue is sort of pushed to the background, and you just work through it and deal with whatever has to be dealt with. It often hits you the next day after you've already gone home. People complain about how disruptive call is in their night, but I don't think it's unexpected for anybody.
You got a line?
Yeah, we have a line.
Okay.
Sailing is running in.
Okay.
I've been working for about 15 or 16 hours already. I'd like to maybe get some rest, but I don't really feel this intense urge to sleep because there's a lot of work still to do tonight, and I'll probably be up for most of the night. And while I might need a cup of coffee at about 3 or 4 in the morning, I think that I think the need to work and the need to get things done sort of gets you through the lack of sleep.
The demands that are placed upon them are incredible. And in high demand situations, you do perform, and you can perform reasonably well. But it's unpredictable when errors can come up. And it's not doctors, it's nurses, it's the whole culture, the whole environment of the hospital.
Okay, prepare to defibrillate.
Charge. Everybody clear? Clear.
Good. Get them on the monitor and just continue CPR.
Personally, it's aged me. I feel more tired. I mean, I knew when I went into nursing that this is what it is, but the actual reality of doing it, day in and day out, it's difficult. It takes its toll.
When I was working as an emergency physician at Sunnybrook Hospital, our whole group was very sensitive to the impact that shift work has not only on our own internal biological clock, but on our own performance, our ability to make clinical decisions.
So, Dave, it must be
nice that you're not doing those night shifts anymore. Do you remember what that was like?
Well,
a long time ago?
I do remember it, yeah, a long time ago. But you know, it's amazing that once I stopped, it took me about 6 months before I felt really rested. I'd wake up in the morning, I didn't have that sort of chronic fatigue that you feel when you're working shifts all the time.
Yeah, that's one thing about working nights, is that you sometimes never feel that you ever get all the sleep that you need.
El doctor Rick Verbeek conoce a Dave Williams desde que trabajaban juntos en emergencia.
I find at nighttime, I have a very one-track mind. I think of a problem that the patient may have, and I sometimes find myself not going beyond that. I get ready to send the patient home, and I really have to stop myself. I purposefully have to stop myself and say, just hold on for a minute, think of a few other things, really think of them seriously, and try to avoid that tendency to send that person home early, mainly because I'm tired, and I just don't want to have to think about this problem anymore. What I need you to do is just to breathe quietly through your mouth, okay? Just nice and slow.
I think one of the things that I'm doing now more than I did in the past was using strategic napping as a plan, you know, where if I'm up late and I haven't got a full 6 to 8 hours sleep, I might get a 2-hour nap in the afternoon. But it's interesting that we can look at professional yacht racers who are in transatlantic yacht races where they will actually sleep for 15, 20 minutes at a time, stay awake for 45 minutes to an hour, and then use that as their way of getting sleep because of the operational demands that are placed upon them.
It may very well be something that would be useful for us in the emergency department to really take those sort of short power naps that you were talking about. The more I think of it, the more I think I might try that the next time I'm on duty.
Well, it certainly works for us.
One of the things about napping is that you better get real and realize that it happens anyway. But it happens inadvertently. It happens because a pilot in a cockpit, or both crew members in a cockpit, nod off. Locomotive engineers running trains, drivers of trucks, all sorts of people nod off at the controls. The issue is, do you want to happen unplanned, unanticipated, maybe at a critical moment? Or is it better to allow a safety valve and allow people to nap at certain discrete times in the workplace when it's safe?
If your workplace can create a healthy environment that allows you to take a selective nap, my God, that means that your industry might be working a lot more efficiently, a lot more productively.
Esta quizás sea la alberca más grande del mundo. Aquí, bajo condiciones semejantes a la gravedad nula, los astronautas se entrenan para la próxima misión importante de la NASA, la Estación Espacial Internacional.
Once the space station arrives and is functioning, it will be an enormously important platform for carrying out human biological experiments in the space environment and for really understanding the impact of microgravity on human functioning for all the different physiologic systems as well as for the timing of the sleep-wake schedule. Our approach now is shifting to much more practical, non-invasive studies in which we can gather data from a much larger population and begin to assess really how much sleep does the average crew member get on the missions. What types of imposed schedules for their work-rest schedule and their light-dark schedule are most difficult for the crew members to adapt to. And what is going to be the impact of the longer duration of International Space Station flights?
En la futura y primera visita humana al planeta Marte, los astronautas se quedarán allí por más de un año.
The mission to Mars is actually scheduled for 2014. NASA is in full gear preparing for human exploration of Mars. And one of the tasks has been to evaluate physiologically the medical issues that might be faced on such a journey. So we have subjects living in our environment here at the Brigham and Women's Hospital in which they are scheduled to the Martian day, which is different than the Earth day. So they're actually on a 24.6-hour schedule because on Mars, every day is about 36 minutes longer than it is here on Earth. And we're finding that is not a trivial adjustment. The facility itself doesn't look all that different than any of the other environmental suites that we have for studying human circadian rhythms. But if you lived in that room, what you would experience would be that the cycling of the light-dark cycle would recur on the Martian day rather than on the Earth day. And the computer that runs the facility sets the timing of all the events in the schedule, and these are synchronized to the Martian day rather than to the Earth day.
Where we're trying to look at humans' ability to adapt to a Martian day length, and what are some of the consequences of living on that day length. So here we can simulate people waking and sleeping on a Martian day or Earth day, or many other types of day lengths. Most of our studies are anywhere from 10 days all the way up to 2 months, so 55 days in length. And the people live in these suites for the full 55 days, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Good, how are you today? So how did you sleep last evening?
It took me a little while to fall asleep.
Fall asleep?
Yeah, and I had to wake up once, but otherwise it's alright. Great.
Now, in these sensors, what we're actually measuring is the ones on top of your scalp. We're looking at your brain waves, so we can look at how well you're sleeping, the duration of your sleep, and the different sleep stages, which we'll show you later. So, have you ever seen your sleep?
No, you can actually tell what stage sleep I'm in.
We can tell what stage of sleep you're in. We can tell when you're dreaming or when you're in very deep sleep, again, a quiet, restful sleep. And then we're also going to be looking at your brain waves while you're awake, so we can look at your brain and how well it's functioning during performance tests or when you're just sitting here reading. So we want to look how alert are you.
Durante su estadía en la habitación de Marte, los sujetos son sometidos a pruebas cognitivas para medir su desempeño y destrezas. Se les extrae sangre para medir, entre otras cosas, los niveles de oxígeno y dióxido de carbono que afectan el sueño. El resultado final de todo esto es un banco de datos sin precedentes sobre el sueño que estará a disposición de terapeutas e investigadores.
No one respects sleep anymore or thinks about it or makes it a positive priority. When you're a little kid, you're told, if you're good, we'll let you stay up later. So all of the joys of life are from staying up later, not from going to bed earlier. And I think this is where a lot of us would like to see some change, that sleep becomes a positive priority.
That's so not reassuring.
La doctora Caden ha estudiado los patrones de sueño en niños, especialmente adolescentes, quienes son sujetos oportunos debido a que comienzan cada vez más temprano la jornada escolar.
Hop in. Our current research is trying to examine what happens during normal development of adolescence, how sleep patterns change, and what's involved in those changes. One of our first studies showed that, contrary to the old adage, the older you are, the less sleep you need, during the ages from 12, 14, 16, the need for sleep doesn't get lower, it stays about level. So a 16-year-old needs as much sleep as a 10-year-old. The other thing we learned was that even with this optimal amount of sleep, as kids go through puberty, they get a little sleepier in the daytime. Okay, now please open your eyes. Continue to lie very still. Please open your mouth real wide and a big wide yawn. Real wide. Rob, can you give me a big wide yawn?
Son las 8:30 de la mañana. Después de dormir toda la noche, Robert y Maggie deberían estar descansados.
As you can see, Maggie's already shown signs of falling asleep. The slow eye movements tell us sleep is coming, and this change in the EEG pattern show us that she's in stage 1 sleep. So in these very few minutes, she's already shown us how sleepy she is. This test allows us, in a very precise way, to measure exactly how sleepy kids are. We also now are learning more about the timing of sleep, and a lot of our focus now is on when teenagers sleep. We've known for years that there's this tendency for kids to go to bed later and to sleep in the morning if you let them. There are a lot of pressures in their lives that lead to this change in pattern. high schools now seem to be starting earlier and earlier. And when school starts at 7:15 or 7:30 in the morning and they can't fall asleep until 11 or 11:30 at night, then we have a serious problem of short sleep during the school week. There's a real disconnect now between teenager sleep patterns that are naturally and socially induced and what the school systems are expecting.
I have to work at night. It's like I'm home late, finish up homework, and I don't have enough sleep to get to school in the morning.
I don't go to bed till like 1 in the morning, so I really only get like 6 hours of sleep.
Usually don't get to bed till like 12, 1 o'clock. It's usually like 5 hours of sleep.
You just don't get to sleep enough, so it's kind of hard.
No es de extrañar que los adolescentes se vayan a la cama tan tarde. Muchos tienen actividades deportivas después de la escuela o trabajos de medio tiempo, sin contar las tareas y la televisión.
The test is going to start off with multiple choice. This is your first experience having a test with me.
This school, we start at 7:20, and some of these students are on the bus for an hour, don't have breakfast, and it's a real rush. And I think you see a lot of kids extremely tired and not able to do their work because it's just too early.
So I just want to lay out the format of it.
There are students who will actually just fall asleep through a whole class. And they admit it, they're tired. And they will tell you, they're tired. And it's very, very difficult to get angry with them when you know they're exhausted. They come in, they're yawning. It really, really is a problem.
Their bodies may be sitting in the classroom, but their brains are still back home on the pillow. And in fact, when we brought them into the lab to study them, they could fall asleep in less than 3 minutes at 8:30 in the morning, which would be second period in school.
I find myself kind of tuning out the teachers sometimes because I'm just thinking about how tired I am.
It has been a holy terror to have to deal with the kids at that time in the morning. They almost never eat breakfast. They're not awake enough to be hungry at that point in the morning. They walk out of the house with wet hair. They don't get up early enough to generally dry their hair. And it seems to have had more of an impact upon my daughter in the morning. She just simply biologically does not function well at that time in the morning. And she's usually not very nice.
Why don't we just switch elementary and high school students? Because it makes so much easy.
Because the elementary kids are always all wiry in the morning.
Easy. Yeah.
They get up at 5 anyways.
Plus, you know what? Yeah. Plus, parents can make sure that their little kids get on the bus before they leave for work. If they go to bed at 9 and then they get up at 6, that's 9 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Simple math.
They don't even need that much.
It's like twice as
it's
much
like
as
the parents
I
are sitting there in the morning. Go to bed. Stay asleep. You don't need to get up yet, and they're still getting up.
I think the kids would be happier. I think having a good breakfast and not rushing in the morning, I think they'd be happier coming a little later.
Even if you start school like 15, 20 minutes later, it still helps a lot.
I'd like to see school start an hour later, but I'll take it in 15-minute increments if that's how it's going to occur.
8 o'clock would be excellent. I would love that.
If kids had more sleep, which means that school would have to start later, the quality of their work would improve. They would come to school ready to learn.
We did a big survey of some 3,000 high school kids in the local area. And what we found was that there was a relationship between the grades the kids said they got and how much sleep they said they got. And it was clear that the kids whose grade performance was worse were getting less sleep than those who had good performance in school.
Alvin Mogg es un joven de 16 años que abogaría por la importancia de dormir.
In my last year of high school, I feel that sleep was like a bit more important than before. So I slept an average of 10 hours. It definitely helped my performance in school. For me personally, I sleep almost 12 hours before the exam. I study beforehand, but sleeping before the exam is definitely important.
Alvin, quien se graduó en la secundaria con un promedio académico de 99.7%, está cursando 3 menciones en la universidad.
I think school should start at about 10 and end at 4 or 4:30. I guess I like dreaming too. Dreaming is kind of relaxing for me.
Cuenta la leyenda que la diosa de la luna se enamoró de un joven pastor. Se podían encontrar únicamente en sus sueños. De allí que ella haya procurado el sueño eterno para ambos con el fin de estar siempre juntos. Qué gran diferencia de nosotros que le estamos robando a nuestros hijos la necesidad básica de dormir.
Kids are no longer sleeping in their beds. They're sleeping in a daycare center. There are now 24-hour daycare centers scattered around in North American continent.
It's particularly troubling for children who are often missing out on sleep just to keep up with their parents' schedules. And so you see them being dragged around at malls until the mall closes at 9 o'clock in the evening.
There is some evidence that kids who have sleep problems or bad sleep habits will continue them throughout life.
Además, nuestra cultura ofrece pocos incentivos para cambiar. Entonces, ¿a quién podemos recurrir?
I think that there's many terrestrial spin-offs from the space program to help us understand sleep problems and sleep physiology on Earth. And I think overall we have an appreciation for the importance of rest in optimizing human performance, recognizing that there's a correlation between fatigue and impaired judgment and impaired performance. And that's something that's not only relevant in the space program, it's relevant for people who are working shifts, people who are performing in critical areas.
El peligro reside en que un mejor entendimiento del sueño y el rendimiento podría ser usado en nuestra contra en lugar de ayudarnos.
One of the challenges is that people will try to take use of those to work even longer and even harder, and companies will use that to staff their facilities even tighter, more tightly than they've done before. So clearly there's a counterbalance that needs to be addressed here. Clearly we don't want to go too far and push the limits too far, even though we can make it safe within a certain range for humans to live, work, and adapt and play in a world that's no longer begins with dawn and ends at dusk every night.